It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. It's the SDG Podcast. We're here at the Podcasters. Say hello and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Els Tahura.
Hello, I'm Chad Jettner.
I'm Peter Lawrence.
And I'm Kyle Bacher, and we have a special guest today. Eric Tice is one of our Scrum Masters, because we're going to be talking about Agile Anti-Patterns. So we figured we should get an expert in the room. My first question is, what the heck is an anti-pattern? I think you guys have been jargoning without me.
We have.
Is that a programmer thing?
No, do you know what a pattern is, right?
Yeah, a buttrick pattern. You make like skirts and cloaks and robes.
Well, you're gonna have to explain what a skirt is, but no, a pattern is just like here's a common practice that has worked in the past, right? And for software developers, there's the design patterns, common algorithms, common things, and then we've kind of extended that to patterns around Agile, Scrum, and the entire practice of creating and managing a software project. And an anti-pattern is when you take those patterns and you do bad things with them. Peter,
Okay.
Is that a fair, or Eric, is that a fair assessment of what you would?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So it's not a best practice, it's a bad practice, or maybe a worse practice.
I
my
would call
notes
it an
about how not
opportunity
to
for
do things.
improvement.
Excellent. So
Aw.
I've never actually been on a project with a team that's doing like full Agile, like the way I think it's supposed to be done. So Eric, could you just take me through like the components of doing Agile so that I understand it?
Sure. I'll try to give you kind of the elevator version of it, a real quick breakdown. But essentially, Agile is a way of kind of doing iterative development with quick turnaround, so that you can react to customer feedback and try to give them something that they want, versus planning something out for maybe a year or more and then delivering something that the market may no longer need. There's a lot of different flavors of Agile. In particular, the one that I am kind of an enthusiast for is Scrum. It is the one that's predominantly used, but there's a number of other ones out there: Safe, Less, DAD. But it kind of focuses around a time-boxed period where the team says we're going to get X amount of work done, or try to get that much done. They meet daily, maybe in a morning stand-up, to talk about, this is what was accomplished yesterday. This is my goal for the next day, to bring up any impediments that might be blocking them from achieving their goal. And then at the end of each of one of those iterative periods, often called sprints, there's kind of a period of review where you might look at the progress that you made, determine your direction for the next iteration, and then have a team retrospective to see ways that you can improve your process.
Excellent. So, Chad, you seem to know a lot about how to screw up Agile Scrum projects.
Wow.
I'm not sure that's a fair assessment,
No.
It's not, but
but it is a
No,
good lead-in, Chad.
It is
defend yourself. Yeah.
Thank you, Kyle. That was awesome. Well, here's the thing, right? Like Agile itself, we've been practicing. What's it been, Eric? About 20 years, 25-ish years that it's been kind of since the Agile Manifesto was put out there. And the Agile Manifesto, if you don't know, it's there was 12 principles of Agile that a bunch of software developers came up with and kind of agreed on, like, this is exactly what it means to be an Agile. This is how we think software products should be built, right? And a lot of the fellas in that signed the manifesto that came up with it are fairly well-known guys. Ward Cunningham, right? The guy that came up with the concept of wikis, right? Like he's one of the authors. Martin Fowler, who we've all read his book on development. Like they've written, they all came together and they said, here's some of the things that we think matter in software projects. And it's all around like changing requirements. Requirements change fast. So here's how you respond to them. And then working software, the best one, the one that I always key in on is working software is the primary measure of success, right? Like that's one of the 12. And one of the anti-patterns is, when we diverge from that, when we go into other ways and other measures of success and it just putting a lot of process around Agile, introducing a lot of overhead to the process. Like the process seems like, in my world, a very lean, like, okay, self-organizing teams, developers, trust them. They'll build something great if you trust them, if you give them your trust and, if they earn it, all that fun stuff. If they build working software, if they hit a cadence, all these things are outputs of a well-run Agile project. An anti-pattern for me is when there becomes a lot of oversight to this process, right? Like you get so many folks involved, so many people, and then you mix and mash. In large organizations, you might mix an Agile project with a waterfall project with a whatever. I've dealt with that before, right? Where I'm on a project, it's Agile. There's this other team, they're doing kind of a waterfall approach where they want all their requirements defined at the start. Well, those two processes don't necessarily coexist. Did I key it up enough for you? I can keep going, man. I've got a whole bunch of these.
No, I think that's good. That's like our first
start.
anti-pattern is unnecessary overhead. So like one thing that always bothered me was when I was asked to track my tasks down to like a 15-minute or half an hour. We don't want to know how much it takes for you to do all these different types of tasks. So you're trying to track your time down to the hour of what you worked on, and it's a lot of work. It seems like it's definitely an interruption. And then if you're going to log your time, remember to do that.
Yeah.
Documentation.
I think before you go to documentation, Kyle, I think you're kind of hitting on something that Chad, you were talking about too, where just if you are prioritizing the process over the people, or you are asking your people to give such minute logs of how they're using your time, you don't have that trust. And it seems like it's going to be very hard to have a successful Agile product, project, team, whatever level, if you don't have some of that trust. Eric, would you agree with that? Or do you have kind of examples of like, how do you, if you have a group that you're coming into a new client and you're seeing that, okay, we all got our certifications, we are doing Scrum, but we're still not trusting each other.
Right.
How do you
the classic
do that?
Scrum butt or Franken Scrum?
Yes.
Yeah. It's micromanagement like that is a problem that creeps in. A lot of times, and we have to remember when we go to with a lot of companies, there's the development team is working on software, and there are other parts of that company that are working on finances and other things, and they have a different maybe goal or agenda. So it's just trying to, how do you adapt to give them what they need, and but still give the development team enough of a leash, so to speak, to go and be awesome. My background, I was introduced to Scrum through the video game industry, and it's an industry where it's very much, you're working on stuff that has never been done before, or if it's been done before, you're trying to do it in either a better way or some kind of new twist. And, an example that I've always used is a lot of times developers are told, you have to make 4 chairs this week, as an artist. And at the end of the week, guess what? The project gets 4 chairs. But if you give the developer the trust to say, you know what, we need you to come up with a system to create the chairs, the developer can come up with a system where they might make a base chair and then 10 different versions of legs and 10 different versions of backs and 10 different versions of arms. And now you can mix and match in the system and you have hundreds of chairs available after, 3 or 4 weeks of work. So, giving the developers that freedom to kind of, a little bit of autonomy to, not telling them this is exactly what you have to do, but saying this is the end result of what I want. And then especially in Scrum, the goal is for the product owner to say, this is what I want. And the developers will say, okay, this is how we'll get there.
My favorite anti-pattern to start off with is the term stand up and how few, almost no, I've been at one client where we actually stood for stand up. And I've been at a lot of clients where we do not stand for stand up, which just, I mean, it's harder in the remote system world to create a standing area for stand up and stand up only, right? But the whole logic behind the standing up for stand up is just completely lost on some places. Where you take a stand up that's supposed to be a quick, go through step by or person by person to get an update on where they are and keep the sprint moving forward, and turn it into a 1 hour long status meeting, planning meeting, whatever meeting, talking about, not about lunches, but, anything other than your status is just crazy to me.
So besides, depending on the time of day that might be happening, that might eat into your lunch hour, or that might eat into another meeting. Like, what, besides the fact that it takes up more time than is ever allotted, what's the negative impact of that you see, Peter?
To me, mostly it's getting way off into the weeds, talking about things that probably aren't even this project. They might be talking about some other waterfall project that isn't connected to the project at hand at all, right? Like, well, you guys should have a different meeting for that to talk about it instead of taking up my lunch every day, or, let's split it out and make it the quick status update, find out the blockers. Don't spend all hour talking about one blocker, right? Because you're not going to solve it. If you didn't solve it in 5 minutes with the group that's assembled, you're probably not going to solve it in an hour with the group that's assembled. Somebody's going to have to take that information and go remove the blocker in a different way, right?
So, it's the plot gets lost and the meeting becomes something else. Isn't really the purpose of the stand-up really for the Scrum Master, so that they know, like, they know what's going on, so they have that kind of continual awareness, and then they know if they've got to remove obstacles or things like that, right?
It's a good opportunity to bring up those obstacles, but that stand-up meeting is really for the development team. I mean,
okay,
it's a planning meeting, and basically it's an opportunity for them to plan their work for that day. So if a developer says, I'm going to work on this today, and somebody else says, you know what, that has a dependency on something I'm doing, I'm not done yet. Okay, can the first developer then help get that done, or should they go on to another priority? It's an opportunity for maybe the product owner might come in and say, look, guys and gals, we planned out the next 2 weeks. We're 2 days into the sprint and something major has come up. So you know what? We're going to have to table everything that we were going to do, and we've got to kind of reorganize and and replan because, the company's hemorrhaging money in our production environment or something, super important. But in my mind, that meeting is really mostly for the development team. One previous company that I worked at, I actually worked with my team that whenever we did the stand-up, whoever was giving their update, and we had a virtual team because we were dispersed throughout the world. When somebody finished giving their update, they would decide who goes next.
Right.
Popcorn. Yeah,
Yep,
we did
yep.
that.
Yeah, well, I'll pass the conch or I'll pass the ball to so-and-so. The nice thing about that is, one, everybody now has to pay attention in the meeting because they might be next. Okay.
Right.
They also have to kind of pay attention to, okay, who's left, who hasn't been called on yet. And it also removes me from being the focal point as a scrum master in that meeting. So now I can sit back and I can watch people's reactions to, this person just said something and somebody else's eyes got really big and they are concerned, but they're not voicing that. So I can step in and say, hey, there's some people who might not be comfortable with that. Do we want to discuss that? Or maybe let's bring that up in a separate meeting. Let's set up an additional discussion for that. So, but yeah, that meeting, I mean, developers planning, kind of setting the course for the day, and just, it's an opportunity to raise problems so that I can go off and solve them, or the product owner can assist, or another team member can help. So
Yeah.
should never wait for that meeting though to raise an impediment. Always, yeah, communication.
For me, being a tech lead on a project, that Scrum meeting is probably one of the most important meetings. The morning stand up or Scrum, whatever the heck you want to call it. That's actually the most important, 15 minutes of my day, because and the way we do it is it's going to be quick, right? The thing I hate about them sometimes is when, we use, a lot of projects use Jira. Somebody just says, yeah, I'm working on this Jira number, still working on it. I'm going to be working on it all day, right? Like, all right, cool. Like, not really, don't tell me what specific thing that I have to go look up you're looking at.
You
Tell
mean
me
you didn't,
specifically, like,
you didn't memorize the whole board?
I mean, I did, right? But I don't expect everybody else to, right?
Right.
But like as for a Scrum Master, for anybody, for any of the tech leads, getting context for, oh, okay, this guy's working on an API. He's got the get endpoint. He's got an update endpoint. You can kind of plan around what the next guy's going to pick up. I mean, depending on how you broke up the project, if it's, front end, back end, batch jobs, all the other stuff, you really do get a sense for what you can plan folks to, what you can line up for folks to work on, where things are, and what their blockers are. As a tech lead, it's our job to eliminate those blockers, right? If they're not organizational blockers, if they really truly are, technical hurdles, that's where we jump in and say, oh, well, this is whatever. The one thing that I see in the stand-ups that sometimes gets to be a problem is when too many people join, right? Like if it's more than just the dev team and a Scrum Master and a product owner, maybe, like if you get other management involved, other folks chirping up in those meetings, it gets kind of bogged down in details that don't matter in the context of that meeting. I'm sure everybody, like, obviously everybody's feedback is important, or whatever you're supposed to say, but the
I disagree with that.
But marketing concerns may not be the meeting to bring up marketing concerns right now.
right, or if the wrong guy hears somebody struggling on the wrong problem and then puts it in, I always think of these folks hearing a developer's concerns about a specific problem and then cutting their experience into what they heard, and then repeating, and then starting this game of telephone that says, oh, I heard this during the stand-up and they're really, really struggling and blah, blah, blah. The folks that are in that meeting need to have the context to be in that meeting, right? And so that's developers, that's the Scrum Master, and that's the product owner there to provide, direction if there's a question. Maybe QA, but yeah, that's one of the anti-patterns with the daily stand-up that really gets to me, is just way too many people, the wrong people, being in the morning stand-up meeting.
Shouldn't need an auditorium for your stand-ups.
You shouldn't need an auditorium. I mean, I would, if I could, I would force everybody to drink a gallon of water a half hour before stand up, so that you get to stand up and you have to go to the bathroom, right? Like you have to make it fast.
That would be a differently titled meeting, I think. We'd have to call it something
And then
else. But
you use the gas station approach where the key is tied to a rim from a truck, and you got to get the key. So there's a race to that. I can see all sorts of potential for speeding people up. So, what about we kind of got a high level of like the theory and stuff. Are there certain, you do the stand up, and then, I've done like 3/4 Scrum, almost Scrum, where we've had a Kanban board and we've had, like user stories um, for requirements. And is there anything like in terms of artifacts or things like that that you generate throughout the project that you really don't need to do or that you got to do?
Well, one of the ones that that really is important in Scrum, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, is the retrospective. And a lot of people on Scrum projects really don't like to do the retrospective. They don't necessarily like to do the self-assessment, or it's done too often. But it's really an opportunity, especially early in a product or a project, to like look at your processes and figure out kind of where your pain points are. And I mean, it like a lot of people too, say in their ideal workplace they would have, the ability and the authority to go and fix things that they don't like and that they're broken. And the retrospective is an opportunity to do that. But a lot of developers and product owners as well are busy. They got a lot on their plate, and they kind of see it as a distraction, so they don't like to do that. So that's one. The other one, you were touching briefly on over attendance at meetings, and I would also argue that sometimes under attendance can be an anti-pattern. A lot of teams will put together the Scrum team, and guess what? The product owner might have 10 other jobs at the company, or the Scrum Master, it's 25% of their assigned duties, right? And in a well-run, good Scrum environment, you've got a product owner who's engaged and a Scrum Master who's engaged and a team that's engaged, and they work together to produce the best that they can. I've often fantasized about, instead of putting together a Scrum team to work on a product, it would be interesting if a company would decided, we are going to be in the business of doing Scrum, and to prove out that we're getting better at doing Scrum, we're going to put our product through the process. Mm-hmm. And so the product is the secondary piece, and getting better at the Scrum framework is the primary focus. It's a pipe dream.
I agree that it probably is a pipe dream. That though it is a good approach, I think, to taking things. I have an anti-pattern for the retro where at some point some folks in management looked upon the retro as a great opportunity to explain to the team all that they'd been doing wrong for the last sprint. And not really asking for people's opinions, but just laying it out there, right? And whether you agreed or disagreed or whatever, the retro probably not a great place to you should probably create your own meeting for that kind of distribution of fun. Just because.
Say that again, Peter. Distribution of fun?
Fun, yes. Well,
Okay.
Fun is on a bell curve, Chad. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
I
was thinking
maybe anti-fun. Maybe anti-fun.
You don't want your retrospective to become a threat retrospective where you're getting
okay, I'll do all the
trouble. You don't want your people to feel like they're getting in trouble. Yes.
But it's also, part of, like, as a Scrum Master, I'd say that's one of my goals, is to create a safe environment where people can give the feedback. And also, there's some stuff that comes up in a retrospective that the team doesn't have control over. You know what? We need support from outside of our team, and you can identify those. But also, there's stuff that the team has control over, and making sure that those are identified, and then we put action behind addressing them. If our goal is just to keep bringing them the same things up and complain and never address them, well, that's not doing us any good. But if we say, you know what, we've got an issue with the way we collaborate, we're not punctual for our meetings, those are things that we can address as a team. We don't need outside help. And then in our next retrospective, we can review and say, yeah, we've addressed that, and look how well we're doing. Our velocity's gone up, or our meetings are getting shorter.
Eric, how do you, when you run a retro, right?
Mhm.
So what I like is when we just put it, there's three things, right? What went well, what could be improved, and then there's some action items, right? So so there's really two things, right? And then at the end of the retro, we actually pick action items out of the retro. Oftentimes on projects, the what can be improved, people just say Chad, and that stings. But whatever.
Tough love, Chad.
I know.
It's mostly when they all nod along going, oh yeah, that.
Well, yeah. Well, so the way we do it, the way I've done it a lot of times is what went well, what can be improved, and then people can vote on things, right? Like if somebody brings up an item, you vote on it, and what gets the most votes is the thing that makes it to the action items. Or if a tech lead brings something up that really matters, then that also gets moved over. Again, lots of folks vote on improving Chad, which is hurtful, but I get it. How has that gone for you, Eric? Because I've seen
every company's different, and every team is different. I've been in some retros where they're larger team retros, and we might have 20 plus people involved. I've been in some that it's just small team. I think it kind of, you have to read the room a little bit, and depending on how much interaction and feedback you're getting, if you're getting 2 or 3 action items, maybe they can all be addressed. If you have a team that's very communicative and collaborative, and now you have a list of 20 items of areas that we can improve, okay, let's, what are our biggest ones that maybe we can focus on, or maybe some low-hanging fruit that would be easy for us. One of the things that I've picked up over the years that I really like to do is, once you've decided, either through voting or just picking them because the list is so small, turn it into a user story in the next sprint. Because oftentimes when people go through that retrospective, the minute they leave the room, their mind is now, okay, I'm either going into the planning session, so I've just flushed all the retrospective, and I'm not going to remember it until 2 weeks from now when it shows up on my calendar again.
That's right.
And then, identifying somebody as well, if you're going to put that in as a user story, who's going to be driving that effort? And it's not always a Scrum Master. It might be a developer, it might be a tester, it might be the product owner. But that way, it ends up on your board, because you use a Kanban board in Scrum, and it's a way for you to look at it daily. It's there. It's one of the things that we're trying to achieve in the next iteration, in the next sprint.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that I've seen not work at some clients is the false equivalency of the action items or what we want to do better as the same thing as performance reviews, where if we have something that we need to improve on, that means that somebody's doing a bad job, or that we don't want to bring it up because we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and just trying to, Eric, like you said, like create that safe environment where people can share what they would like to be different to help make their job easier, to help make everybody else's job easier, and that it's iterative improvements rather than character attacks or
Right.
personal
There's-
vendettas.
Yeah, there's a great quote by John Wooden. He was a coach for, I think, UCLA basketball for years, and he was famous for many, many quotes. And I don't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, "It's what you do after you know everything that defines you and makes you better," right? And if you look at somebody like a Michael Jordan, yeah, he was at the top of his game. That didn't mean that he couldn't get better, and that's what for me, a retrospective is that opportunity. Yeah, you know what? The team is functioning. We are delivering product at the end of every sprint.
Not at each other's throats.
Yeah. Can we deliver it and be happier? Can we deliver it and be providing more? Can we deliver it and, not have it be a painful slog? So that continual improvement is really important. A lot of people, they a lot of times see that retrospective as just kind of a speed bump on the way to planning.
So something you just said there would kind of kicked off a little memory. Like, I've been at retros where some retros have been just like, okay, it's very quiet. We're functioning really well this particular sprint. We did things pretty well. Everybody's on time to meetings and then, 2-3 sprints later, it's like, oh, we've kind of let a few things fall off
Right.
the attention table, and we need to focus again on some of these things, and it helps keep that team going, right? Like, oh, we were doing this great 6 weeks ago, and we've kind of fallen off a little bit, and let's bring it back up again.
Right.
And it's nice. So it's that constant practice and constant review. Michael Jordan probably still practiced basketball on a fairly regular basis when he was a professional. He didn't just stop and play video games to try to get better. He
Yeah.
Not that there's
Time
anything
to
wrong
coast.
with playing video games.
That's right.
Well, you get in that, you hit that wall of, I'm there, I've arrived, like, I'm good at this, I got this. And like, when I think I know it all, the next thing I do is be wrong, fail, things. It's always better to be like stretching and reaching and pushing your way forward than like just riding the wave, because you'll fall off.
Yeah, the auto industry is a prime example of that. If cars run and they run well, but if they didn't iterate and innovate, we wouldn't improve mileage, we wouldn't improve safety, so
I feel like
every once in a while you're going to make a Pontiac Aztec, and you're going to learn from that mistake, right?
Right.
True. Yes.
And I do think, like, one of the takeaways, Chad, is that I think your team views you as part of the product. So they're iteratively like, Chad is awesome. Let's continue to make Chad better.
True.
And I think that's the takeaway.
I feel like that was a compliment.
Yes.
And I don't know how to take those.
So
That'll be an
Thank
action
you.
item for
Yeah,
our next
what I do.
One
podcast
other
retro.
one other anti-pattern before I forget it, I wanted to throw out there that has plagued teams that I've worked on is taking on too much work at once. Right. So
tell me more.
there's always the drive to get more done, right? And a lot of times, like, you can only have so many hammers hitting the same nail, right? So you can't put 9 programmers necessarily on the same piece of code. So a lot of times, people there's multiple streams going on, but sometimes you'll fall into the trap where, I start on this and then I have to pick this up and then I have to pack this up, and then amongst the 5 people on your team, you've got 15 things in progress, and you get to the end of the sprint and you don't really like, none of it's really in a done state, right? And it's kind of that whole adage of a few things completely done is more valuable to the product than lots of things half done.
Right.
Which
You're
is
not a blocker on 15 different things. You have 3 things done successfully and move to done, right?
And I should completely put out there too that I'm coming at this from a non-programmer, non-developer viewpoint. Chad, as a technical lead, you might have a different viewpoint on this, or you may have a strong opinion.
it is one of the tent poles of Agile, of the manifesto, right? Working software is the primary measure of progress. And 15 half implemented solutions is not working software. That's 15, that's, you're going to make a Pontiac Aztec that way. Nobody's going to be happy, right? Except the dude from Breaking Bad.
Or you're going to have 15 different solutions all clogging up your QA environment. So that makes it even harder than to like, okay, this is how we're actually going to get something to production. Which one goes first when you have 15? Like, yeah, you've got a line that doesn't make any sense.
And, we've been talking about developers and stand-ups, and there's other roles. There's other people on the project. You've got QA, you've got your data integration people. Like, how do you lump those people in? Like, are they part of that process? Are they in the Scrum? Are they part of Scrum? Are they?
Well, if you look at Scrum, there's only 3 roles. There's a product owner, there's a Scrum Master, and there's the team.
Okay.
So the team generally refers to generalist people who can push the product forward. The reality is that often on a product or a project, you don't hire somebody because they're a generalist. You hire them because of a specific skill set. They are, and even as an individual, I don't set out in my career to be a generalist. I am an expert in QA automation, or I'm an expert in UI programming, or so. The role is that of a team member, and then when you break apart work, you might designate different pieces of work to different team members, but the whole team is responsible for moving on an increment forward for the product. Does that answer your question, Kyle? Or
Yeah.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you're working towards specialization, but you're trying to also encourage generalization, because one of the advantages to having a team of generalists is that anybody can pick up a piece of work. How many times have you been in planning and we need this new database piece, but the database programmer's on vacation, or he's already overloaded, and so we don't have anybody who can pick it up. So a lot of times when I work with teams, I encourage them to, let's cross train. It's going to slow us down right now, but we have to accept that understanding that as we move forward, now instead of having one person who can work on the database, we've got 4 people who can work on the database, and people can take time off, and we can pick up more work, or
and maybe one person who's responsible for the database and 3 people that do things that maybe get approved through that person, but they don't have to be the blocker for that piece of work. Which I think
Chad, it looked like you were going to say something.
No, I think it's, I'm seeing more and more what Eric's talking about, more, not necessarily, not like super general, like we don't have developers that are also QA people. We have a QA type role and we have developers, but I don't necessarily see anymore so much developers that are only integration specialists or only this. A lot of teams now are predominantly leaning towards full stack developers, which is a guy that could do an integration, a back end, a front end, whatever the heck. We do have, we do have folks that are incredibly talented at front end development, we've got our React and Redux guys, and then we've got the same on the back end. But I think we're generally leaning towards just a developer role, right? I don't know, Peter, is that right or wrong? Or
I guess yes, with the caveat that it's a blend, right? The front end developer is not going to switch over and only do back end stories, right? For the duration of the project, most likely. They're going to take front end stories when they're available, probably, but you're not really worrying about which stories you're putting into the sprint because anybody can pick them up.
yeah, I mean,
Whereas
when I do sprint planning, that's kind of my tilt is, all right, it needs to be kind of balanced. There has to be,
right.
Here's my team. Here's how many front end fellows I have. Here's how many guys that are better in the back end that I have. And then here's me, who's not good at anything but just talking nonsense. So let's balance out the amount of work and the amount of story points accordingly, right?
Right. But at the end of the day, if there's a story sitting there and all your team is busy, Chad, you might pick that story up if it's the right story, right?
Mm.
But
And I know
Yeah.
I've certainly done that where you try not to scope out, oh, well, this is a Chad story and this is a Kyle story and this is an L story and we'll put one of each in and then they will have work for the sprint. It's like,
Yeah, you have to have a flexible, agile team to do agile projects. It doesn't always fall the way you think it's going to fall. I've been the lead, with going into it clearly defined roles and tasks, and then I end up doing half of someone's tasks, that I wasn't planning on doing. But that's that's not like dropping the ball.
no.
Like they didn't drop the ball. It's like finding your way and what's the best way to get this stuff done and move forward, and kind of that balance of stuff where this was too much to put on one person. And we needed to a lot more time like upfront for this, to ramp that person up. And like they were new at the technology and the back end, and with SharePoint, doing web services is not easy.
It's totally exactly the same, Kyle. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's a configurator position.
You just kind of happily like shift and take on what you can take on, and you kind of find your way as a team. Like, how do we best function as a team?
And no, it's also interesting. Like, so Scrum, kind of when it was thought up, we didn't have Zoom, right? We didn't have Microsoft Teams, and so the whole concept about Scrum was basically getting a group of people in a room together to glom onto solving a problem, like a beehive, right? Kind of just everybody putting their arms around each other. We're all going to kind of work on this together, right?
Right.
And especially now with the pandemic and remote working, you're seeing a lot of work, that same work where it might have before a user story might have been something like, I want a way to have a login to our product, and that would encompass back end work, front end work, testing, web development, right? Now, the way that work is being broken up, it's being broken up kind of by component because the team is dispersed, and now you can't necessarily beehive around it. You've got to kind of spread it out and then have it come together and integrate it after everybody works on their part. So it's kind of just interesting the way that outside forces have caused a little bit of an evolution in the idea behind it.
Right.
Agile Manifesto tentpole number 6 says the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face communication.
Yeah.
Chad, it sounded like you read that. Did you read that, or is that just part of your daily?
It's all up here. It's all up.
Nice.
Yeah. You can't see the reflection in my glasses, can you?
No, your glasses aren't blue at all.
Yeah.
So you're doing Scrum, you're doing Agile, and you've got leadership that you're kind of reporting up to through the product owner. Um, is it difficult, or is there any difficulty if leadership doesn't understand Agile and Scrum
Yes.
versus
Oh,
the
yeah.
old ways, like standard, pull out Microsoft Project, figure out every task, like how long everything's going to take, become a master magician and liar at the beginning of the project as if you know exactly how long things are going to take.
Right.
But are there expectations that get handed down that's like, well, we really don't do that for this. I can't
Well,
give you what you're asking for.
yeah, I think, it's part of taking on, there's taking on the Scrum philosophy and framework at the kind of the team and the product level, but there's also the taking on of Scrum framework, at the enterprise level. Like everybody has to be willing to work within that. When I was first introduced to Scrum years ago, there was a great book that I always recommend by Ken Schwaber, and he talks about various development challenges he faced over the years. He was a Scrum Master on the Department of Defense project where everything was redacted because he couldn't get clearance. And so how did he work in that environment?
That sounds fun.
But in the specific case, one of the things that he talked about was there was an engineer on one of his projects who was consistently behind in his work. And what he found out was the vice president of the company was always coming to that engineer on the side and saying, "Hey, can you just do this real quick for me?" And so, kind of reiterating that kind of some of the rules around Scrum of that, as a stakeholder outside of the team, you really should be working with the product owner to talk about what your priorities are so that that product owner, who should have been chosen because they are in the best position to make decisions for that product, they can decide, is this higher priority than the thing in production that's hemorrhaging money,
Right.
or, if we don't meet X development by certain milestone, we don't get paid by the person who's paying us for it. So, so they're having a company that has bought into that is very, very important. That's where you get like the Saabs of the world, where they do scrum of scrums all the way up every day through the company, and it really, really works well for them.
That was going to be one of my anti-patterns is no side hustles within a Scrum team, right? Not necessarily like outside of work side hustles, but like you don't do work that we haven't actually talked about during planning, right? Like everything is pretty transparent. Here's what I'm working on today. Here's what I'm, here's what's in our backlog. Don't just, do something that's not a part of that just because.
Right.
Whatever.
If it's not on the board, you don't do it.
And as a Scrum Master, that's one of the things that I'm always watching for is, hey, so-and-so asked, brought this up. Great, that's awesome. That is super important work. Let's put you in touch with the product owner so you can get it prioritized for our next sprint.
Yeah.
Or is it important enough where we've got to stop everything and restart, But yeah, and hopefully you've kind of ingrained that in your team where the team is also saying, yeah, I see what you're saying. This is pretty important. Let's bring the product owner into discussion. So
Right.
And
kind
that's
of gently coaching them towards the decision that they should be making.
That's where getting the product owner to trust you and your team is so freaking important because Kyle, freaking is acceptable, right? Just want to make sure that before I say it.
Flipping is the word you're looking for.
Okay.
We'll
But like
fracking, flipping,
Heckin'.
frickin'. Yeah.
All right. That's why it's so heckin' important. I like that one. Thanks, Al.
Yep.
It's for that guy to trust you because, especially if you're dealing with, your product owner might not be a technology guy. He's a domain expert in whatever, right? And so when you come at it from a Scrum Master perspective or a tech lead perspective and say, hey, we need this resource or we need this guy to focus on this thing for this reason, if he doesn't trust you, he's going to, you're going to get second guessed and it's going to be goofy, right? I've seen that happen before. But, if the guy trusts you, he's like, yeah, that's great. Prioritized according to, the whatever our project plan is. But like, if you say it's important, we'll do it. We'll, no problem.
And depending on the team size and the company size, there could be times where the CEO is going to stop by so-and-so's desk and ask for something, and you're just going to have to do it, right? But it doesn't have to be a secret project. You could just put it in the board and look, this is why we missed getting this whole sprint done, was because we have 7 different CEO projects that we weren't aware of at the start of the sprint.
Yeah, talk about it in the retro. Hide my desk from the CEO, right? Like, move me where he can't find me. Put me in the basement with a red stapler. Do something.
Right.
I think one of the other anti-patterns that I've always loved, it's probably one of my favorites, is when somebody says, give me an estimate on something. And so you provide an estimate, and now your estimate is etched in stone.
Yep.
And it's no longer an estimate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do.
A deadline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm awfully fond of using Fibonacci numbering for story points, right? Because then you're not like, like to Kyle's point, right? Like, this isn't a 15-minute task or a 2-hour task or whatever. It is this size relative to all these other tasks, right? And it's a very almost like grading on a curve type system where you don't have to necessarily say, yeah, I'm 4.5 hours late on something that I promised.
Right.
You just kind of swagged it, and it's wonderful.
And you get better at picking the correct Fibonacci number for the team, right?
Yeah, once you dig into a sprint, you're not going to get it right sprint 1, 2, 3, not until you're in double digits probably. But once you're in double digits, your numbering and your estimates relative to other work on the team and relative to other skill sets are relatively decent, right? Like, better than they were sprint 1, hopefully. But
you do have hard limits and brick walls. I mean, if you're saying we want to do X and this is all the money we have for that, like literally this is it.
But and typically, remember, so there's 3 legs to the stool, right? You've got, resources, you've got time, and you've got money. And resources is people, right?
Yeah.
So typically in a development project, you really can't change people all that much because it takes time to spin up somebody and get them to be contributing. So that one often stays fixed. So really what you've got is time and scope, right? And oftentimes your time suddenly becomes fixed as well, because you know what, we've committed to, we've put a date out there to our customers that December 1st is going to be our launch date. So so now you're down to one knob. You can control scope.
Yeah.
So.
And I sure hope you haven't released a bullet point list of everything that was going to be in that release on that day, because we told you not to. We begged you not to.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, Eric. It has been very valuable to have you here.
Thank you. This was fun. I appreciate it.
We were going to go with the 4 of us, and we just realized that we need a master. We need a Scrum master. Somebody does this for a living.
Yeah, like I said, I'm more of an enthusiast.
You're a Scrum enthusiast.
Yes.
I am a generalist. So with that, I'll just cut that out. That was the SDG podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you want to drop us an email, we're at thepodcasters@solutiondesign.com. Until next time, say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.